Greetings, intrepid man. You responded to one of my videos accusing me of strawmanning the gospel accounts, and my criticism of the gospel accounts specifically was their episodic nature. This idea that Jesus performs a miracle, the disciples are amazed at that, then they forget all about it, then he performs another miracle, they're amazed again, and so on and so forth. And you get this repeated pattern over and over again. And I noted that the disciples are basically two-dimensional dunces with short-term memory problems, or else the Gospels are not an accurate account. Well, just to show you that I'm not strawmanning here, let me go ahead and just show you this list I prepared of the miracles that Jesus performed. Wise men came bearing gifts when Jesus was still in the crib, with gold and such. Herod tries to massacre all the infants around Jerusalem in an attempt to kill Jesus. Jesus is saved by an angel warning Joseph to get his son into Egypt. John the Baptist, some 30 years later, baptizes Jesus, and a booming voice from heaven announces, "This is my son." Interestingly enough, John the Baptist's alternative religion, the Mandeans, continue to insist that John the Baptist was the true Messiah and denied the divinity of Jesus. You would think if John the Baptist had submitted himself to Jesus, as the gospel accounts say, and that a booming voice from the sky announces, hey, this is my son right here, you would think that basically all of his followers would be convinced by that, but apparently not. Jesus goes into the wilderness for 40 days. He comes out, he goes throughout Galilee, teaching in the synagogues and healing, quote, every disease and every sickness. His fame spreads throughout Syria. Great crowds came from all over to be healed. Then he gives his Sermon on the Mount. Then Jesus heals a leper, but tells him to keep it under wraps. A centurion approaches Jesus, and Jesus performs a long-distance healing for the centurion's servant. Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law. He heals many others. Jesus, while riding on a boat with his disciples, calms a storm. In fact, at this point, he does say, quote, "Ye of little faith." Read Matthew chapter 8, verse 23 to 27. And the disciples are absolutely amazed about this. Jesus casts out demons from two possessed men and then orders them into a herd of pigs who then perish in the water. The swineherds, apparently after being ruined, ask Jesus to leave town. Jesus heals a paralyzed man on the Sabbath, taking some flack for it by the priests. The crowds are absolutely amazed. A woman is healed by her faith after she touches Jesus' cloak. Jesus resurrects a young girl with a joke about she's sleeping. His fame spreads throughout the district. Jesus heals two blind men and then tells them to keep it under wraps. The healed former blind men turn out to be blabbermouths, and the news spreads throughout the district. Although I think that healing two blind men would be pretty small news in comparison to resurrecting a young girl. Jesus amazes the crowds by healing a mute man and casting out a demon. Jesus goes about the cities and synagogues healing the crowd's diseases. Jesus, feeling the need to delegate, teaches his disciples to heal. Jesus heals a man's withered hand on the Sabbath. The priests become upset and they start to conspire. Many crowds followed Jesus and were healed, but he orders them to keep it under wraps. Jesus heals a possessed man who was blind and mute. The crowds are absolutely amazed. Jesus stops by his hometown, and the people there can't believe there's anything exceptional about him. They took offense to his claims. Did the people from his hometown hear about any of this news here? His fame was spreading throughout Syria and throughout Judea. They didn't catch any wind of any of this. And do the people from his hometown not remember the wise men bearing gifts? Did they not make the royal family, the Holy Family, rich? And the narrow escape Jesus had from Herod's infanticidal rampage, his stay in Egypt for a while? Didn't they notice any of this? Him teaching at the temple at the age of 12, the child prodigy? None of this rang a bell for them? Anyway, Jesus heals another crowd of sick people. He then feeds them with 5 loaves and 2 fish. That's the first of the mass feeding miracle story. Jesus walks on water. The disciples are amazed, and they declare him truly the Son of God. Jesus reluctantly heals the daughter of a non-Israelite scum. This is the point where Jesus says he is only here for the sons and apparently daughters of Israel. And after the woman declares herself to be a dog, then he says, okay, I'll heal your daughter. Anyone who thinks that everyone is equal in the eyes of Jesus really needs to read the book of Matthew. Jesus heals another crowd, and they were amazed. He feeds them all with 7 loaves and some fish. This is the second mass feeding story, and this is one where I pointed out the disciples at the very beginning and asks, how are we going to feed this large crowd of people, not remembering that Jesus had performed the exact same miracle only a few chapters back? Jesus tells his disciple to be aware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. When his disciples asked if that's because they didn't bring enough bread, Jesus goes and then asks them what their problem is. Did they not remember the 2 mass feeding stories where he created all this magical food that fed all those crowds of people? And at that point, it clicks for the disciples. Yes, when you're talking about yeast, that's a metaphor for the teachings of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Got it. The disciples all declare him to be the Messiah. Jesus tells them to build a church, but don't tell anyone. I'm not making that up. Jesus tells his disciples that he'll suffer and be killed at the hands of the priests, only to be resurrected on the 3rd day. This is the first of 3 warnings. Jesus, in front of 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John, was transfigured. The images of Moses and Elijah appeared all about them. A booming voice from the sky announced, "This is my Son, in whom I am well pleased." Jesus heals an epileptic who the disciples couldn't cure. He sounds a bit like a drill sergeant when he starts talking about, "Ye faithless generation, how long am I supposed to be saddled with you all?" and so on and so forth. And he casts out the demon. Jesus again warns his disciples that he's going to be killed and then raised on the 3rd day. Jesus heals 2 blind men. Jesus casts the merchants out of the temple and then heals more crowds of blind and lame. The crowds are again amazed. Jesus curses a fig tree for not bearing fruit out of season. Jesus has his final supper and for the 3rd time clues his disciples in on what is to come with the whole death and resurrection thing. Jesus is arrested and crucified. Jesus dies. The curtain of the temple is split. There are earthquakes. The dead rise. Attack of the zombie saints. And the centurion, amidst all this chaos, says, "Truly, this is God's Son." And then there's the resurrection. So, if you're his disciple Thomas, after witnessing all these miracles and all the other miracles that are detailed in all the other Gospels, would you have any doubts at this point? Now, Intrepid Man points out that Jesus had his humiliating crucifixion, and that might carry some weight, except for the fact that Jesus on not 1, not 2, but 3 occasions told his disciples exactly what was going to come, that he was going to be crucified, he was going to suffer, and he was going to die at the hands of the Pharisees, and then he would be resurrected on the 3rd day. And on cue, his disciples excitedly say that he is risen, and Thomas, after all of this, says that he's not going to believe it. This is not believable storytelling at all. Even the most staunch of skeptics, name any that you like, Payne, Hitchens, Dawkins, Harris, Sagan, whoever, would all be completely convinced by all of this overwhelming evidence that they've seen time and time again. At this point, expressing any doubts at all would be positively irrational. It would be like doubting that the sun is going to rise in the east tomorrow morning. There's no question that this is not believable storytelling. It is episodic in nature, and it does seem like a sloppy patchwork yarn of different miracle stories all stitched together, sandwiched between a put-down of John the Baptist and the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. So if you have anything more for me, please let me know. May God's gift of reason light our way.